Thank you all for joining. The webinar will begin in about a minute.
All right, I think we're ready to begin. Welcome everybody to the State of the City Address. I'm Katie Brooks. I'm with the Bend Chamber of Commerce, and I want to thank all of you for taking some time today to hear about State of the City. What are some of the hot issues? What are some of the plans for the coming year as the city prepares to open up a new beginning in 2021 and say goodbye in 2020? I think we're all ready to do that. Before we get started, a few reminders. First of all and foremost, please vote if you haven't already. And you got a few more days, and there's a county voting station is also open. So use an option that makes sense and get your ballot in. So today's programming is brought to you by our sponsors, Mid-Oregon Credit Union and Cascade Insurance. These two folks have made it possible to do both the State of the City and the State of the County addresses, so we can make this free to the public and accessible to all. So thank you again to our sponsors. And before we begin today, I'd like to introduce them, and they have a short video to share.
So today, it really is a reflection of who the organization is. This isn't a thing like, oh, we're going to be different, all 364 days, and then we're going to come here and have a rah-rah day, and then just let it go. This is what we do.
It's probably one of the best organizations that I've ever worked for. They're very family oriented, and they're always willing to work around you and your family. And if you ever need anything, any help at all, they're pretty much anybody in this building is willing to help. And that's awesome to me because it's rare to find.
It's really nice to have community partners such as Mid-Oregon Credit Union and Laura and her staff, and it's amazing how vested they are in our community, because not only do they do this with us today and then help our clients with establishing an account, they also collect school supplies for us at the beginning of every school year, so we're able to then put that out there for our families as well. So it's just an incredible collaboration, and we're really fortunate and really lucky to have such a great team such as Laura and hers that are here with us today and that actually we can count on anytime.
The thing that I love most about Mid-Oregon Credit Union is their passion for people, not just for the communities that we live in, but also for the employees and the members.
there is no organization can do a better job of serving the community by knowing and being the community than Mid-Oregon Credit Union.
Exhilarated. Just absolutely love this. This is my jam. I love it.
Hello, I'm Patrick O'Keefe, owner of Cascade Insurance Center. I'm glad you're able to join us for this year's State of the County and State of the City. First, I'd like to thank the Pickleball Zone and the Trampoline Zone for letting us film this introduction here at their facility on 18th Street. Cascade Insurance Center has been a member of this community for over 35 years, most of that time right in downtown Bend. And as a small business owner, I can definitely say that the state of the county and the state of the city directly affects me, both personally as well as on a business level. Whether you live here, work here, own a business, or are employed by one, own property, or just come to our beautiful region to recreate, the state of the city and the county affects you too. Like many businesses, we've had to navigate the challenges that have been presented to us this past year. While some of these are outside of our control, the response from our elected officials and community leaders very likely have a direct impact on us. And that impact can affect the bottom line of some of our local businesses. So it's important to hear where we stand at this point in time on some of these issues. And with the many curveballs that have been thrown at us in recent times, day-to-day life goes on. The business of the city and the county continues. Housing, transportation, the tourism industry, addressing homelessness, streets, roads, and much more all continue to require our attention as we continue to grow, as we know we will, in a healthy and strategically planned way. So it's important to understand maybe the rationale behind some of these decisions, or where we are in the planning or the processes of some of the things you'll be hearing about. I'm hoping you'll listen closely as our presenters provide their perspective, and feel free to engage by submitting your questions and comments. I'm hoping we'll each learn a little bit more about our city and county. So thank you for joining us in the state of the county and the state of the city.
Thank you again to our sponsors, and good segue. Just a reminder from what Patrick was mentioning in the video, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We have a staff standing by and we will field questions, but first we have a presentation from the city for the State of the City Address. And I want to introduce our speakers here today. First and foremost, Mayor Sally Russell. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mayor. And also City Manager Eric King and City Economic Development Director Carolyn Egan. Thanks to all three of you for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and hand the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everyone. It's certainly our pleasure to present State of the City today. And I want a special shout out and thanks to the Bend Chamber for hosting this and so many other informative events for our community, especially this fall in our election season. So we can all agree it's been a difficult year. 2020 has been tumultuous. We've seen a pandemic, economic crisis, social unrest, and more. And for individuals, companies, and government, adapting, changing in real time, this has become the new normal. And I know, we all know it hasn't been easy. So one thing I hope you will leave with today, however, is a better understanding of the role of your own city government here in Bend, how it pivoted, adjusted, and led our community in a way that traditionally governments have rarely done. Our reality changes every day, as does yours. Recognize, analyze, change, pivot, adapt, learn, sometimes within a few days or weeks, which all used to take a month. This is our environment right now, all of our environment. We, the City of Bend, the mayor, the council, the city staff, we are working hard every day for you. Despite this uncertainty, there are many things that you won't, despite this uncertainty, what you won't see is inside the City Hall, we try to be as nimble as you are outside the City Hall. Beginning in early March, just as most individuals and businesses, the city had to adapt while still keeping planned projects moving forward: road construction, sewer projects, selection of a new police chief. So one example that happened back in March is in the spring, we saw reduced traffic on our streets. And we had a lot of road construction projects to get done this summer. So staff saw this, they took advantage of it. We hired unemployed contractors who had been freed up in other communities who weren't moving forward with their projects. And we ended up getting work sooner on much needed road projects ahead of schedule and often ahead of budget. The City of Bend has reached both inside and outside, looked for, created, and strengthened partnerships, including the Bend Chamber, local government partners, School Parks County, and more, Neighbor Impact, Pandemic Partners, food banks, so many more, all aimed at focusing resources where community members needed them most right now in real time. I'm going to pull out one specific example because a lot of these changes that we made in real time in our community have a long-term benefit in terms of structure and allowing our partners as well as the city to move through whatever comes at us next. I'd like to talk about the Emergency Operations Center. In the face of the pandemic and the rapid changing and critical needs throughout our community, we helped stand it up. We supported it financially and with people at the table. And we were able to create change and serve our community in ways and at a speed that we hadn't been able to do before. And this structure now stands ready to meet what other future needs and emergencies might come forward. I want to turn a little bit to council goals. It's been almost 2 years now since the then new council set its goals and its budget. And this spring, we had to make several adjustments. We adjusted the budget mainly because of COVID-19. We had to reduce our budget. And we had to, again, bring in new goals and make sure we allocated money to areas that our community needed in that moment. So under goal 1, which you can see here, we created a new strategy and related actions: build community and economic resiliency in response to COVID-19 through business and family support assistance. New industry development: we use CRF and other funds to make direct investments that diversify the city's employment and occupation base. Supporting vulnerable populations with an equity framework. COVID-19 has had a disproportional effect and impact on traditionally vulnerable and marginalized communities. And we completed many actions, including establishing the Environment and Climate Committee, which was a 2-year project at least, moving up to that action. Under transportation and infrastructure, again, I talked about those changes and the way we pivoted in getting road construction projects done more efficiently and sometimes more cost effectively. Goal number 3, public safety and health. So important to be responsible and accountable to the changing needs and expectations of our community, especially in the face of the pandemic. We revised our strategy to seek opportunities to connect residents and businesses to resources for mental health issues and homelessness. We took $450,000, which was in a public safety budget, and allocated it into these directly related needs of our community. And funding for staff and also for community partnerships. Another new action was to evaluate and implement body cameras for the police department. So as Mayor of Bend, we have big buckets and so many needs throughout our community. And again, we all know it keeps changing every day. We're ready to take on what comes next. I also wanted to say, as a Mayor of Bend, I commit to working closely with the incoming council to continue to address the broad range of needs our community of Bend has today and also will have tomorrow. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Eric King, our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for that overview of the council goals. In addition to those 4 goals, there's actually 64 action items, and many strategies. So we don't have time to go through all of it today. We did want to focus on housing and transportation, as those are our top priorities. And then I'll turn it over to Carolyn Egan to talk about the COVID recovery process and our vision for what's happening on the ground, as well as what's going to be happening over the next few months as we begin to recover. So first off, focus on housing. The council was deliberate in its goal setting process almost 2 years ago in recognizing our housing challenges, and really doubled down to take actions that range from removing regulatory barriers. So these are things like cleaning up our development code, being more flexible with setbacks and other things that just potentially could inhibit housing. Secondly, implementing financial incentives, including system development charges, reducing those fees, those impact fees, especially for affordable housing. Leveraging publicly owned land. City owns some land to dedicate to affordable housing. You see one project that's almost complete now, Canal Commons, up near 27th and Empire. Adopting new housing models such as a cottage code and more recently micro units. And then planning and building infrastructure to ensure that we're opening up land for additional development, both inside and outside the city's urban growth boundary. Really, as part of the council's 2-year target goals, a target was set to permit 3,000 new housing units by the end of June 30th, 2021. The good news is we are well on our way to achieve and most likely exceed that goal. However, before I talk about the progress that's being made to meet that goal, I want to underscore the challenge that we are facing with continued significant increases in home prices. Recent real estate statistics from the October Beacon Appraisal Group tell a pretty sobering story. So in September 2019, the median sales price for a home was $440,000. In September of 2020, that price jumped to $547,000, over $100,000 increase in just 1 year. Also, inventory is at an all-time low of only 0.6 months, meaning that if nothing else came on the market, all listings would sell within just a few weeks. We've been hovering around 2 to 3 months worth of inventory the last 4 years, so this is a really significant drop. And then again, just median days on market, the number of days from when a listing hits to when that home goes pending, 25 days in July, 10 days in August, and I believe 5 days in September, although that data is still being collected. So Zoomtown is a reality for Bend, and we'll have more on that later. So highlighting this challenge is really, it provides a key perspective. We're proud to show you the results of how we are meeting our aggressive goals that were set almost 2 years ago. However, the takeaway is that the world has changed and we need to continue and bolster these efforts. So next slide, let's focus on the numbers. So with over 6 months to go in our goal period, we are at 97% of our goal. This graph breaks out in more detail, including what's already been built. Our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th. So you can see that on the far left, the previous year, what's been built the first 5 months of this fiscal year, what is under construction or is in some type of plan review, meaning it's a real project and it will be completed here soon. When you add all that up, that's where that number on the far right of the screen that shows that 97% of goal. Next slide. So let's talk about what's being built. Bend's housing stock has historically been dominated by detached single-family homes. Really, it's that percentage of our housing stock has been between 70, 75, upwards of 80% over the history of Bend. And really what was built last fiscal year largely reflects that historical housing mix. But what's interesting to note is that this current fiscal year, which includes those housing units currently under construction, tells a completely different story. Our housing market is changing, and this is not by accident. More has been done over the past few years to allow for a greater mix of uses in Bend's core, which has produced housing like the Nest. It's featured in this slide. That's right across the street from OSU Cascades on Chandler. The Hickson Apartments, which is near the old Rays site. These projects, along with others that are completed all over the city in Southwest Bend and East Bend, really represent a large shift in our housing mix, as evident in the pie chart on the far right. This greater diversity in housing units allows for more of our community to be housed. Next slide. In addition to what's being built or is under construction, there has been significant activity in nearly all of the urban growth boundary expansion areas as noted in this map. A total of 7,600 housing units have been either built or approved through master planning processes. So this represents nearly 74% of the forecasted number of units to be constructed through the year 2028, which is defined by our urban growth boundary expansion process that was approved a few years ago. Many of these housing units will be built out in phases over a number of years, so they don't always hit that goal that I talked about earlier, that 3,000 housing units goal. But it's an encouraging sign that investments have been made through public-private partnerships to create needed housing and infrastructure to support growth. And this growth is consistent with Bend's vision of complete communities that provide much needed neighborhood amenities, especially to our east side of town. New parks, commercial areas, and major infrastructure projects are all currently in the works. One visible example is the recent work in Northeast Bend that included the Empire Connection to 27th, which opened up opportunities for development, including multifamily, some affordable housing that I mentioned earlier, Canal Commons, single-family housing, commercial development, schools, and a park. This allowed the city to work with Polish Homes to construct 2 roundabouts on Butler Market, both at Deschutes Market and at Eagle Road, to improve traffic flow as well as provide a more complete bike and pedestrian network. We continue to focus on our growth management plans to ensure that we have the right mix of housing types to serve our growing community and a wide array of income levels. Further, we better monitor supply levels to help plan our next urban growth boundary expansion efforts, which I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes. Next slide. So as part of Bend's continued strategy of growing both up and out, Council has prioritized creating detailed development and financing plans that have been created by a mix of technical expertise, driven by rigorous economic analysis, overseen with extensive community involvement that goes well beyond the traditional meeting structure and really going out to people. It's really important that we take different approaches as our community wants to be involved, and they should be involved in creating Bend's future. The core area plan was adopted late this summer, which creates an urban design framework, tax increment financing district and plan, as well as a complete refresh of applicable development codes to a better align to market realities. Recommendations from the Juniper Ridge Management Advisory Board will be coming to Council next week and have taken much the same philosophy and approach, creating more opportunities to optimize how land is being used based on current and projected market conditions, as well as aligning our land use plans with our economic strategies for jobs and housing. And the market is responding to these signals, which these changes have brought. And that has resulted in offers, real estate offers over the past few months on virtually all of the entitled land at Juniper Ridge. So some exciting news. Next slide. Our efforts of increasing the supply of housing by changing codes, creating opportunities for public-private partnerships, and building needed infrastructure and updating zoning codes all reflect a more modern and emerging urban core are not the end of the story. In Bend, we have to go further to create and guarantee a more affordable housing product that can be provided for our nurses, firefighters, baristas, et cetera. We have a goal of completing 100 deed restricted units per year. We've completed that goal last fiscal year, and we have a staggering 480 units in the pipeline. However, it's still not enough. All of this is made possible by a dedicated funding source, which is 1/3% of a building's valuation that gets paid at the time of a building permit, generates about $1 million per year that we then put out in the form of a request for proposals for the private sector to compete. This local funding source has created opportunities for Bend to have a seat at the table in shaping statewide housing policies. And some recent legislation has allowed us to strategically expand the urban growth boundary to create a mixed use community of both market rate and affordable homes, known as House Bill 4079. And then more recently, there's been some changes in state law that allowed for greater flexibility in citing needed shelters for those experiencing homelessness. Next slide. So in summary, affordable housing is where we're making progress in addressing needs of historically underserved and marginalized communities. And we do that by leveraging our funds effectively, as shown in the graph here. And really the approach is a partnership-based approach, partnering with the private sector, with nonprofits, with social service providers, really connecting housing to services. There's so much work that we have done and so much more work to do. I want to especially thank Bend Parks and Recreation for their efforts to exempt system development charges as part of this partnership approach. And just know that options are going to continue to be explored in the near future to enhance our local sources. Next slide. So the punchline in highlighting this work is the need for a programmatic approach in how and where we grow. So we need to go beyond the thinking of an urban growth boundary expansion as just an event that happens once every 10 years in a fast-growing city like Bend. The recent surge in growth we've been seeing during the pandemic requires us to act quickly and respond to market demands. Decisions on where and how to grow are largely driven by data, which has now been made possible with real-time land inventory information, which was another project among council goals. And this real-time data provides us the opportunity to move towards a more continuous loop of implementing our growth management strategies, making adjustments as needed, but not sacrificing the vision that we've all worked so hard on. The next biennium will bring forward another strategically focused UGB expansion in addition to continued planning work inside our current UGB, making sure that our development code, infrastructure plans, and related financing tools are all working synergistically to implement this vision while we are experiencing this high level of growth. So next slide. The land use plan sort of sets the table, but it's really transportation that makes it work. And it's really an opportunity to really look at the city through that equity lens and making sure that we're bringing all of our community up and improving their daily lives. And really survey after survey, transportation continues to be one of the, if not the most highest priorities in Bend. Thus, it's been a primary focus of council goals. So a quick overview of the council goal strategies related to transportation. They really span from high level, completing our transportation system plan, which is a 20-year vision, which I'm proud to say has been approved and has gone to the state without any appeal. And that's really amazing for Bend, but that's not been our history. And so the community really came together over the past 2 years to complete that work. And it's a good example of the type of involvement that's needed to come together and unify around a growth strategy. Kind of more on the ground, we do look to leverage partnerships with the private sector to build infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier with the Northeast Bend example of completing roundabouts in addition to some public projects with the extension of Empire, that's just one example of many across the city that we are implementing to be smart with our investments. And then the third strategy, once we build it, we want to make sure it's maintained. And so we have a very rigorous asset management system, in particular our PCI, Pavement Condition Index. We are on an upward trend of improving the condition of our roads. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And then all the way down to that local level, making sure that as we grow, our neighborhoods are being managed, the parking in our neighborhoods is being managed appropriately. And so some work to create parking districts. So just real quickly, some examples of this playing out. The neighborhood street safety program has been very successful. We involved a newly created Neighborhood Leadership Alliance, a collection of all the 13 neighborhood associations in Bend to help prioritize investments really at the local level to improve biking and walking in neighborhoods and overall safety. And these projects are happening. They've began construction this year and more to come next year. Next slide. In improving our PCI, we have a goal of having a pavement condition index of 75 over the at the end of next fiscal year, and we are on track to do that. Over almost 10% of our system was repaved this summer, and we're getting out into neighborhoods more and more. And then lastly, and probably the most significant project is the general obligation bond that is in front of voters this November. November 3rd, please vote, as Katie mentioned. This is an opportunity to really make a big improvement to the system and address many needs, really connecting with community values around improving east-west connectivity, fixing intersections where there's bottlenecks, improving biking and walking all across Bend, and doing this in a way that's sensitive to the economic times. Council was deliberate in delaying the implementation of this bond until the year 2022, the levying of taxes until the year 2022. And then for the first few years of the bond, the average cost for a median tax assessed valued home is about $30 per year for the first few years, again, as the economy recovers. So speaking of economic recovery, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Carolyn Egan, Economic Development Director, talk through that recovery process, and we'll round up and look forward to your questions. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you, Eric. So as both Mayor Russell and Eric alluded to, we had to figure out, just like you did in the early days of the COVID-19 sort of situation, how we were going to meet all those goals that we created a year and a half ago and still operate. And so what we saw happen is we created the what you're seeing up there. These were our COVID-19 operating objectives. And we said, okay, so in order for us to get everything done that we already promised the community, we're going to need to think about this a little bit differently. How do we protect the safety of our employees, just the way you're thinking about protecting the safety of yours? But remember, our employees are your police officers and your firefighters and your utility workers. And so we had another level of thinking about how we protect the people who protect you. We had to think about how we support public health. Cities and public health departments historically we talk occasionally, but we're not typically talking every day about what this looks like. You all know that we had countywide and region-wide coordination around getting information out. And as the situation began to unfold, we recognized that we had a role in public health in terms of even getting personal protective equipment out to the right places. And then finally, we were going to play an instrumental role in understanding how we support the economy, families, employees, businesses, and our most vulnerable citizens as we went through, as we sort of traveled through the time from spring and into summer, and then still today. We operated pretty quickly under the sort of phases of stabilize, preserve, and recover. And if you can remember back to those early days in the spring, we were in free fall from an economic standpoint. Businesses weren't sure what was coming next. Employees didn't know what was coming next. And so we really wanted to make sure that we did everything we could to stabilize businesses. You saw loads and loads of information go out to businesses. You probably got 3 of the same emails in one day. You saw our very specific newsletters and our very specific web pages set up so that businesses could understand what was going on and what to expect next. You saw us think about members of our communities who we're not traditionally sharing the story with. And so translation of materials into different languages, specifically Spanish, but then recognizing the need beyond. And you saw us start to remove barriers as quickly as we could to make sure as we went from lockdown into phase 1 and then quickly into phase 2, what were the accommodation that we were going to need for our most impacted businesses? And you saw that continue throughout the summer. And that's when we moved into the preserve stage, where we really needed to think about what can we do so the businesses that are reopening, what do they need to stay open? Is it PP&E? Is it more information? Is it a help rearranging their store? Is it help moving their tables out to the street? What are the things that businesses need? Is it help getting their employees their unemployment insurance or going to a work share? So we really thought about all of the ways that businesses needed support and tried to meet businesses where they were. And we've continued that through the summer. And we really imagined that we were going to we'll stay in this preserve stage through phase 2 so that we can be really ready for recovery. The other reason to think about this in 3 phases is so that we didn't do anything as a city in the early days that would somehow hamper our recovery. And so that was one of the reasons why we prepared for really diligently how we would invest the coronavirus relief funds that were meant for local government really early on. And that's why you saw council adopt a change in council goals in the early summer, so that when the funds came to the city in the end of the summer and the early part of the fall, we were able to quickly deploy funds through our partners. And I think our deployment of the CRF funds is definitely one of my proudest things to talk about today. If I can make this slide. So we were able, we talked about this before. So we identified vulnerable communities, we identified businesses, we identified childcare providers, and then we also identified the need around housing. And you saw us put money in those buckets, but we didn't write any checks to individual families or individual businesses. We used the existing partnerships that we have. So the Bend Chamber did the business grants, Neighbor Impact helped with childcare and housing, United Way helped with the vulnerable community granting. And one of the things that happened on top of all of this is we found out that schools weren't going to open in the traditional way in the fall. And we quickly moved some of those resources to provide help for the providers, the organizations in our community that provide school age programming. So through United Way, we did a quick agreement with Better Together. And most recently, we've been able to do additional dollars to Better Together to keep those school age programming programs opened so that people who don't, so families that don't have another option for their school age kids have a place to put their children that's safe. All of this money, I would say 80% of the dollars now have actually gotten into the hands of businesses, childcare providers, and the organizations that are helping our most vulnerable. And we couldn't have done this without the existing partnerships we had way back in the beginning of January, the ones that were built during those early days of the pandemic. And we know that these are going to be the ones that we need as we continue, as we plan for, and then as we look towards recovery. So Eric mentioned it before, Zoom towns are real, and at least based on the data we have right now. So using house sale data from September of this year compared to September of last year, we are seeing that the number of home sales in Bend is literally off the charts. And so you can see in this graph, these are really popular metros, and then you have these 3 towns at the bottom where they are seeing housing turnover much more quickly than any other place in the country. And so as we think about recovery, we have to think about it in the context that we have something here in Bend that is not happening anywhere else in the country. And so we do have to think about all the positives and negatives that come with our new community members who are finding their way to Bend in the last couple of weeks and will continue to find their way to Bend in the coming months. So what will recovery look like? So I already mentioned that Bend we are going to have a different trajectory than most of the country and probably most of the state. But one of the most important things that we need to think about as a community as we look towards recovery is what will be a K-shaped recovery. So for those of you who can remember back to your sophomore year of college or your senior of high school in your economics class, typically we think about recoveries as V's or U's, or we even talked about a swoosh or a square root recovery as we went into this, but the K recovery is one of the most difficult ones. And that's where you see the most educated and the highest wage workers recover quite quickly. They may not even have seen any kind of contraction in their household income or anything like that. So there's this really quick recovery. On the other side of that, though, are the lowest wage workers and the workers in your economy that have the lowest educational attainment. And they have, unfortunately, even as things start to recover, they're still going down in terms of losing ground from a wage perspective or from an employment opportunity perspective. So recognizing that our recovery is going to happen in the context of that is really important. We know that we're going to have sustained in-migration. So if you thought you had 5 new neighbors last week, you're going to have 5 new neighbors next week. I mean, this is not slowing down. The positive side of that is that we have sustained job growth. So again, we will, the low wage jobs and the service sector jobs will probably taper off. We know that we'll see business closures, but at the same time, the in-migration will sustain our job growth compared to other parts of the country and other parts of the state. No question about the rapid housing appreciation, no question about the continued demand on infrastructure. But as the community gets younger and as the community changes, you're going to see different demands, more transit service, more trail, more amenitized infrastructure than what we've seen demanded in the past. And then a persistent call for community conversations. We've seen this throughout the pandemic. With all of the things that have happened, but we saw it before that, as Eric alluded to, the way we addressed the core or even our UGB, our TSP, just having to look much more deeply at who are the individuals who are participating in our decision making and how are we making specific and really, really thoughtful efforts to include the widest array of people in that decision making. So focus areas for recovery, I've talked about childcare. Workforce development is a new one for cities, but as we think about that K recovery, would be really thoughtful about pairing employers to employees and the bridges that those two groups may need to be able to find a perfect match. This is the first time as your economic development director, I've put homelessness in front of housing. And it is clear from what we're hearing from the community, the business community specifically, is they would like to see some leadership from the city in addressing homelessness. We are stepping into that role. We are looking for all of you to come along with us as we endeavor in that new role, but it is absolutely going to be paramount that we address this as part of our recovery. We know we'll have infrastructure needs, and all of this work is going to be on a foundation of continued community conversations. So thank you so much, and I'm handing it over to Sally.
Thank you, Eric and Carolyn. I always learn so much, as I'm sure everyone in our audience has today as we listen to you. A lot of detail into a healthy community. I want to close with this. We all feel it, and we know that we are very close to a national election, and local races are really important for us too. And I just want to recognize that during this unsettled time, we're all very concerned about the safety for each other as well as our fellow community members. This is a time for unity. Unity is needed. Yesterday, I was fortunate enough to participate in a project focused on specifically this and the safety and well-being of our community as we move through this election season. I'm going to turn it over to Eric for just a little bit more background and details. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, as the mayor mentioned, I want to thank our BIPOC community members and a clergy group that really helped pull us together last week. And we brainstormed how to create a more safe environment in our community. And from that, the idea of a message was created and really quickly put together and executed yesterday. Filming of that message took place at the Tower Theater. The hope is to have that complete by tomorrow and out on the airwaves, social media, and hopefully TV and radio as well, to demonstrate our commitments to unity, stopping violence, and really coming together as we are in these uncertain times. And I think I just can underscore the need for that, because as Carolyn mentioned, the foundation of us moving through these significant challenges is productive community conversations that bring all of our voices together to solve problems. And I'm really encouraged by just this effort that we put together in such a short amount of time is evidence of that cooperation that's here in Bend. It's kind of the special sauce that makes us such a great community. So let's all continue to promote that. And I hope that you join me in really embracing that concept. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Katie to entertain the Q&A portion.
Really great stuff. I want to thank you all for a really comprehensive presentation. Before I get to the Q&A section, I also want to give a shout out to the city. As the chamber, we did distribute about $1 million to the business community here in Bend. And, you know, we got the word out, we did the work, and, you know, they chose to use partners, and they chose to get the money out as quickly as possible, which is why the partnership worked. And I'll tell you the stories that we've heard of those of you who are out there that are struggling, trying to survive and keep your business doors open. I hope we got to as many of you as possible. The need is far bigger than the supply. But I just wanted to say I was grateful to the city for looking ahead, thinking about that, and aligning a partnership with us to get it in the hands of businesses as quickly as possible. So with that, I'm going to open things up. A lot of questions about housing. I'm going to start there. A lot of accolades actually for the affordable housing program in particular at the city. I do know that you have a program here at the city that's the envy of the rest of the state, allocating a certain amount into affordable housing every year from system development charges and fees, and just really being conscientious about that. One question from someone here in town, and I know what project this is, 180 new apartments to be built on the corner of Shevlin Park and Mount Washington. They are asking, and embedded in several other questions are, what is the average median income and what are we actually calling affordable housing now in Bend? Who wants to answer that? Carolyn, is that your question?
I'd be happy to. Okay, so we talk about affordable housing, and then what we try to do is we'll make a distinction between big A affordable housing and little a affordable housing. And so there's two types. So when we talk about the housing mix, getting more apartments, getting smaller homes, getting ADUs, we're really talking about expanding our housing stock so that you have more than just the option of renting or buying a 3-bedroom house with 2.5 bathrooms. That's the little a affordable housing. When we talk about capital A affordable housing, we're talking, and you'll hear us, our nomenclature, we say it without even thinking about it, deed restricted affordable housing. And when we say deed restricted affordable housing, we mean that we have actually put something on that land. We have a covenant on the land that says the apartments cannot rent for more than very prescribed rents, and that the house cannot sell, again, for that same prescribed price. The rents and the house price are set on area median income. So AMI is the basically the calculation that we get from Housing, Urban and Development, HUD, annually that says in Deschutes County, your area median income is a certain dollar amount. So in Bend for 2020, we were at about $70,000 a year. So a family of 4 earning $70,000 a year was the area median. That was the 100% of area median income. As you go down from that, we basically do it in 20% increments. So we'll talk about 80% of AMI or 40% of AMI. When we build rental units, so an apartment of any size, we are trying to use government funds, whether they're local, state, or federal, to keep the rent available for families that are 80% of AMI or 80. Actually, it's 60%. 60%, thanks, Eric. 60% of AMI or less. So really trying to get at the lowest wage earners in our community. So when we do rental units, we're doing 60% of AMI or less. When we do housing units, we're looking at 80% of AMI or less. And so what we do is it's based on your family size. So if I'm a family of 1 and I'm renting an apartment at 60% of AMI or less, I pay the rent that I can afford as a single person. That same apartment, if I'm a family of 3, the rent would be based on our family's income, AMI for a family of 3. There are instances where we build units for families that are earning 30% of AMI and less. And what happens in that is that the amount of subsidy that's required gets higher as the AMI limit, the income limit, gets lower. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it's really complicated, but I think that did answer it. And it's a sliding scale as the economy changes as well. So thanks for that. So I want to segue into a follow-on question that Mayor Russell and City Manager Eric King, I think this is, well, it's all in your boats, but you guys can decide who takes it. I want you to talk a little bit about the urban renewal area. We just pushed forward on that as a city council. Tell me why I should care about that, if I care about housing and if I care about mobility and our community and our culture. Tell me what I get out of that as a citizen of Bend. You want to go first, Eric?
I'm happy to.
Either way.
Mayor
Well,
Russell?
I'll begin with sort of setting a larger context, which is in 2016 when the city of Bend finished its more recent urban renewal area. One of the things that we did in that plan was identify areas that were opportunity areas where we could rebuild them to be more dynamic and more sort of instrumental in creating a healthy and vibrant community throughout our city. So the core, the Bend Central District, is one of those areas. So it's then was identified for a mix of jobs and housing and services. So for me, the real excitement about that is not only will the core area of the Bend Central District contribute to that that sort of revitalization of an area and Bend along the old 97 3rd Street. It really creates opportunities of jobs and housing, and again, new businesses in places for people to work, as well as raise their businesses up in a more central place. So we aren't always traveling so far to get what we need, and we can also live next to where we work or where we get our services. So those are probably the core values that I see as really exciting about all the steps that we've taken to really bring this idea back in 2016. Here we are in 2020, finally to give it the underpinnings to create that reality that was identified for a long time.
The only thing I add is just the some other work that we've done to create more housing in that region. So I think we see a huge opportunity to implement what the mayor talked about, which is this community where really create a walkable, bikeable community that's so close to our downtown. It's got kind of the bones, and we just need to do some work to make sure the development code is working for us, our zoning code is working for us. So it's both that financing plan and that urban design framework coming together to realize that vision. And the financing was the big piece of it. I think that we've had this long-term vision for the central area core, but until we committed to finding resources, and that's what urban renewal does, it sequesters income tax growth from new development. So it takes that new increment and reinvests it into that area and helps to finance infrastructure improvements so that everybody wins. And at the end of the day, the tax assessed value gets redistributed to all the taxing agencies, and we have a more healthy community.
Great, thank you. That's a great perspective from you both. Thank you. So I'm going to turn now to the transportation bond. Full disclosure, the Bend Chamber is supporting this bond and co-chairing the PAC. So I just want to, feels like NPR. I just want to tell you that we're a sponsor of this measure, ballot measure 9-135. So we actually had a webinar a 3 weeks ago that got into the weeds of what is going to be included. But for those of you who weren't with us at that point, Eric, I'm going to turn to you to ask you, what do you think the biggest priority projects are in that bond package, and why were those types of projects selected?
Right. I would say there's sort of two-pronged answer to that. One is improved east-west connections. We heard pretty loud and clear the challenges of getting from one end of town to the other. So the bond includes projects like Reed Market Road overpass. It includes another connection out of downtown to connect kind of that site near Crux, what we envision as part of that core area redevelopment, to 3rd Street, providing better traffic flow in and out of our core area. Or south connections as well, completing Purcell Boulevard, and then many intersection improvements that right now are bottlenecks. And I would say that the second piece of that response would be really that local system. We also heard really loud and clear in our neighborhood workshops that our parents want to give their kids other options to get to school. We have a lot of, when school is in session, parents driving their kids to school and because they don't feel safe with the infrastructure that we have. There's missing pieces of sidewalk, missing pieces of bike lanes. So really completing that entire network. I think that's really the hallmark of that bond, is really addressing local needs, local residential needs, as well as the kind of larger order streets, the collectors and arterials, and making improvements to traffic flow.
Thank you. Next question is about, well, it's related to the pandemic and how the city responded to it, and more specifically, when you're looking forward in lessons that you have learned from the COVID stuff that has happened, and going into the winter when outdoor seating is going to become a little bit challenging, switch from the little black dress to the big black parka. if you're eating outside. Tell us a little bit, Mayor Russell, and then Eric, maybe if you want to add to this. What did you learn as we have gone through this whole experience, and what do you see happening that might help businesses and our community in the winter as we deal with the pandemic spike?
Well, as I said, sort of in my initial talking points, what we learned is that as a government, we can really work with partners throughout our community and create better listening channels and ways that we can learn in real time what people need. And Carolyn alluded to it as well in her presentation. Focusing on the downtown area, I mean, all of us are reading information of how other cities and other communities are addressing these all over the United States. So there's a lot of models, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to consider as we try to make it Bend-centric. So I will say that. And then we have to bring our community along, right? I mean, so we've done a lot of outreach, and we have Ben Hempson as well as who has been a great partner with the businesses as well, the Downtown Business Association. And then looking for funding, as Katie, you alluded to, and Carolyn too, about bringing it to help us all adapt to what's happening next. I'm really worried about some of our businesses downtown right now, as well as throughout our community, how we're going to make it through the winter. So I think we just have to be aware, communicate, look for ways to solve these problems that are immediate. I mean, we were off looking for different ways to get PPE funds to be used for air filtration in restaurants, sort of one tiny little piece, right? We have 5 of us went after it and tried to get it changed to the state level. It's just every day we're working on issues like this. So be nimble.
Eric, did you have anything to add to that? Or Carolyn? Okay. We have time for probably one last question. A couple of folks have asked about the transition. Regardless of the outcome of the vote, there will be a transition on council with Councillor Mosley and Abernathy leaving council, and we thank both of them for their service. So tell us about what you folks are going to do to knit a new council together, to collaboratively set goals. Give us a little insight of what that process looks like when you onboard a new council and you have such an important year in front of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. And then Mayor, if there's anything I miss, you to fill in. So we've been through this every 2 years. We have turnover on council. And so we've established a bit of a rhythm that really meets our new councilors where they're at. I mean, I think that the folks that are running have the advantage of really having a clear understanding of what our community is looking for as part of their campaigning. So we start with first a council orientation process. So right after the election and before councilors take office in January, we meet pretty intensely to just provide a baseline of information around the city's core services, not just from a staff perspective, but from a councilor perspective. So there will be councilors that will be remaining on. And so we want to make sure that those perspectives are shared and that we really create a team environment. And then that builds into the council goal setting, which council goal setting is really driven by kind of 3 key inputs. One, the individual councilors, as I just mentioned, that ran campaigns, our leadership team at the City of Bend, and some of the big projects that will transcend different goal periods, as well as a community listening session, really understanding our city boards and committees, our partner organizations and what their needs are. That all helps to drive inputs into what's important. We then meet as at an offsite location to develop those themes and strategies. And then my job as the CEO of the organization is to work with the leadership team at developing a work plan that helps implement those council goals. And all of that drives budgets, our 2-year budget. And so with a new council being seated in January, we've got 6 months left of our current biennial budget and council goals. So we'll still be working on those plans, but at the same time, we'll be concurrently developing the plan for the next 2 years, making sure that we've got the resources attached to it and we're reflecting council priorities. So it's a pretty complex, intense process over the next couple of months. And we all look forward to continuing to evolve and improve it.
And I'll just, I know it's 12:59, so I'll just say it's really an exciting opportunity, I think, to be a counselor and have these fresh points of view and listen to different ideas. And it's a time to refresh and just be more relevant and more accurate to the needs of our community. So again, right, we spend a couple months just backgrounding, and then we create our goals, and then we create a budget to accomplish our goals, and we have to prioritize. And it's always a transition as we move out of a campaign and then into the real work as a counselor. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Great. Thanks to all of you. So we are going to wrap up, and I want to thank Carolyn Egan, Eric King, and Mayor Sally Russell for joining us today. This was a really great comprehensive overview on what lies ahead with the City of Bend and the challenges that we face together that aren't all bad, folks. It could be a really great year coming up, and we've got great leadership and a new set of leaders in council that will be joining us. I do want to remind everybody that in November, the 18th and 19th, the Chamber is holding a back-to-back impact event on the economy on November 18th, and then on the real estate market on the 19th. You can find out information on our website, bendchamber.org, if you're interested in getting up to speed on the economy and the real estate market. All of today's presentation has been recorded and will be shared with you on YouTube, as well as the materials, so that you can revisit, relook, and share with your friends. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Vote, vote, vote. Have a great weekend and happy Halloween, everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.